So you wake up in a strange room with white walls and mirrors. You look down and you see your clothes. You're dressed in a white robe with sparkling tassels. What is going on here? People are all around you, and then someone says quietly, "It's time." They guide you down a dark tunnel. You can hear people screaming and shouting. Then you can see a glow ahead at the end of the tunnel, and you walk out and you find that you're in a giant arena. The crowd are screaming and shouting even louder. And then you see it. A square with ropes all around it, elevated up onto a platform. The people around you lead you up onto this platform and nudge you so that you have to go underneath the ropes. What is happening? Then a very loud voice is amplified in the arena and it says, "Let's get ready to rumble." There's a man on the other side of the ring who looks like he wants to kill you, and he's throwing air punches. Another man in a white shirt and a bow tie beckons you to come forward into the middle of the ring. And he says, "I want this to be a nice clean fight. And remember, protect yourself at all times." And that is the title of my talk today. Choosing to follow Jesus is like entering a fight for your life. There's so many things telling us that we should follow them instead. Satan wants us to be knocked down, to stumble and to fall so that we stop following God. Our sin is trying to knock us out of this fight and to pull us away from God. But Jesus knows this. And in this passage in Matthew 18, he's telling the people who follow him that if you want to survive, if you want to come out victorious from this fight, you need to protect yourself and protect your church family at all times. So maybe you feel like you've not really been growing in your faith that much recently. There's a sin that you just keep falling into and you don't know how to deal with it. But you do know that it's holding you back from growing closer to God. Maybe you're listening to this and you're not a Christian, but you're looking for some sort of confirmation that your life is on the right track. Jesus wants us to see that our souls are in danger, but security and safety are only found in him. So over the last few weeks, we've been hearing about Jesus bringing his kingdom, and we've been hearing about what sort of kingdom it is. It affects every single decision that we make. It even goes down to paying your taxes, as we heard last week. And at the start of Matthew 18, Jesus says that if you want to be part of his kingdom, you need to become like a little child. So he calls a child over to stand in the middle of them, and he wants to do this to illustrate what he means. And it doesn't mean that we have to be childish to be his followers, but he's saying that the biggest similarity between a Christian and a child is that neither are self-sufficient. It's totally appropriate for us to be calling out to God, "Dad, Dad, I need your help." That's what Jesus means when he says we have to become like children. In verse 6, Jesus keeps using this picture, and this is carried on from the passage, the section before it, about relying on God like a child. And he says that if anyone causes one of his children to stumble in their faith, it's going to be very, very bad for them. It would be better for them to take a millstone, tie it around their neck, and throw themselves into the sea. If you don't know what a millstone is, it's a stone that could weigh up to 1,500 kilograms. That's the same weight as a Ford Fiesta. And an ox would pull it around to grind grain. If you tied a Ford Fiesta around your neck and took it for a swim, you would definitely drown. So why is Jesus being so harsh? I thought Jesus was a nice guy who was always going around loving people. This is Jesus showing us how protective he is of his children. It's like a parent saying, "You can do whatever you want to me, but if you touch my daughter, I will mess you up." So what does he mean by causing them to stumble? He's talking about causing a Christian to do something that will damage their faith. For example, I know plenty of Christians who have been tempted into having sex with somebody outside of marriage because the person convinced them that it wasn't a big deal. Sure, we both love each other. What does it matter? And yet this decision has left them feeling guilty and far from God for a long time afterwards. Or have you ever found yourself being drawn into a conversation about somebody else behind their back? You end up agreeing with some really cruel gossip. And then afterwards you feel so guilty because you didn't want to go there, but it's said now, it's out there. I want you to think very carefully about how you could be causing one of your Christian friends to stumble. Do you make light of certain things in front of them? In verse 8, Jesus talks about how we need to protect ourselves at all costs, even if we need to take drastic action. So he says that if your hand or your foot causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away. If your eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out and throw that away. And then he explains what's at stake. He says, it's better to enter life with one eye than to have two eyes and to be thrown into hell. Does Jesus literally mean that I need to cut my hand off after shaking my fist at that person who pulled out in front of me dangerously? Some people have taken this very literally in the past, and there was an early church monk called Origen who even castrated himself after reading this passage. But thankfully, no. Jesus doesn't mean that we need to literally cut off our body parts that cause us to sin. But he does want us to take drastic action to stop ourselves from sinning. And it's only possible to do that when we realise how serious our sin is. A minister in my old church used to say that sin stands for shove off God, I'm in charge, not you. Every time we disobey God, we're telling him to go away. We're telling him we don't want him here. And if we don't protect our souls at all costs, the consequences are horrendous. In verse 8, Jesus says that we'll be thrown into the eternal fire. He's saying that hell is real, and we do not want to end up there. The way that Jesus talks about hell is really interesting. So Jesus takes a picture from his own culture. And it's hard for us to appreciate this, maybe unless you work in a landfill site. But when he talks about the eternal fire, he wants people to think about a place called the Valley of Hinnom. It was a place outside Jerusalem where the sewage for the entire city was dumped. And we're not just talking rotten food and human waste here, we're talking dead bodies, animal carcasses. I can't go within 2 meters of our brown bin after it's been there for a few days, so imagine how nasty this place would have been. They kept fires burning there all the time to control the volume of rubbish. And that's the picture that Jesus is painting of what's at stake. Stumbling away from Jesus ends in one place, and it's worse than you can possibly imagine. So it's a good idea to ask ourselves, what are my hands, my feet, and my eyes doing? What sort of websites am I looking at with my eyes? What houses do my feet lead me to? We have to do whatever it takes to fight sin. Don't get comfy. If you hit snooze too many times, you'll stop hearing the alarm. It will get easier and easier to put up with sin in our lives, and before you know it, we're stuck. I'm not sure how this makes you feel. I hope you feel motivated to take action and to fight temptation and sin in your life, but I know that it can also leave us feeling a bit hopeless. Personally, I could have my arms, my legs, and my eyes cut off, and I could still manage to sin. You'd have to take my brain out as well. Somebody called Rico Tice said that Jesus uses this picture to show us that no knife will go deep enough. We just can't escape sin. It's everywhere. It's everywhere in our lives. As soon as I start to think I'm doing well, I get all puffed up with my own importance and pride, and then I have to start again. But there is great news. And the great news is this: God protects us at all costs. We're going to see that in the next section, in verses 10 to 14. Jesus says something incredibly encouraging in verse 10. He says that we should never look down our nose at other Christians because all of God's children are so precious to him. He even says that their angels in heaven always see the face of my Father. What? This is incredible. Jesus is saying that angels are looking after us in our weakness and protecting us. Then in verse 12, Jesus tells this story about a shepherd who has 100 sheep. And the shepherd finds that one of his sheep has wandered off. So what does he do? He says, well, these things happen. At least I've still got 99 sheep. No, he doesn't say that. Amazingly, this shepherd is willing to go to extreme lengths to get the sheep back. He's even willing to leave all of the other sheep and to trek for days until he finds it. What a great shepherd. Jesus is saying that the shepherd is God, and that if one of God's people wanders away, God will do whatever it takes to find them and to bring them home. This is how much you're loved. God will protect us at all costs. And we actually know the cost. Jesus is God in human form, and Jesus was willing to die for his children to be able to come back home to him. I know that there's people in our church family who've got broken hearts because family members have wandered away from Jesus, just like the lost sheep. Somebody that I was talking to recently, they said that they feel guilty all the time, that they're not doing enough to bring them back. But the amazing promise is this: it's that if they really are God's sheep, then God will find them. It's not on us. We obviously want to take every opportunity we can to help bring them back, but we don't rescue lost sheep. That's not our job. All we can do is point people to the shepherd. And God is the shepherd who brings back the sheep. So you can be sure that if your child or your brother or your sister is God's sheep, then God will bring them back in his time. So because God comes after us when we're lost, we also should go after our brothers and sisters when they wander away. And in this last section, Jesus says that we should try to protect each other even if they hurt each other, even if they hurt us. When you're in a family, there are inevitably fights. In my family, there was 5 people when I was growing up, so that meant that there was basically a fight every day of the week. And there was any combo you could think of. There was me versus my brother and my sister fighting, my brother and my mum, me fighting my dad. It was basically endless. And in church, Jesus makes us a family with people who aren't even like us. And when you put a random bunch of people into a group from different ages, different backgrounds, and who like different things, there's going to be friction. So in verse 15, Jesus sets some really helpful rules for how the church should deal with sin, especially when somebody sins against another Christian. So let's imagine that Bob finds out that Sally has been spreading rumours about him behind his back. She's been telling everybody that Bob stole money from her. So what should Bob do? What I would do is I would start spreading rumours about Sally behind her back, and I would try to get people against Sally. I would try to start the Nobody Likes Sally Club. But Jesus says that we should do something much, much harder, but much more loving. We should go to Sally and we should ask her if she knew that she hurt us and what she did was wrong. The idea behind this is to give every person as much opportunity to come back to God as you can. Even though it might be so painful for you, do whatever you can to help them in their faith. Don't just hit them back. And that's why the next step, if that doesn't work, is to bring somebody along with you and both of you confront the person. And then have the leaders of the church confront the person. And they might even have to possibly warn them that they might not be part of the church anymore if they keep going like this. And you might be thinking, well, that's very harsh. This isn't going to bring people to church. Church should be a place where people are always welcome, where you never have to turn anyone away. And that's true. But Jesus also says that the church isn't supposed to be the most popular show in town. If we wanted to have the most popular club in Balbriggan, it would be easy. We could just fill the sports hall with bouncy castles and trampolines. We could have huge free barbecues, unlimited barbecues every Saturday on the main street. And people would be flying into us. But that's not what Jesus' church is for. Church is meant to be a lighthouse. It's guiding people to where they can find hope, meaning, and freedom. It's supposed to look different. It's a place where you can become family with everybody because of Jesus. And Jesus warns that if we let sin infect the church, and if we don't confront it, then the light's not going to be as bright. It's going to infect the whole church and its ability to point people to hope. And that's why Jesus says that we should deal with this infection at all costs. And in verse 17, Jesus says that if the person like Sally is confronted and shows no sign of saying sorry or coming back to Jesus, then Jesus gives the church the authority to say that she isn't part of the church anymore. She isn't a member of the family, and she isn't part of God's kingdom. That's what he means when he says in verse 18, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. This is all very difficult. But there's an incredible encouragement at the end of verse 20. And Jesus says, where 2 or 3 gather in my name, there I am with them. Lots of people read this to mean that if you just get a couple of Christians together, then God's going to give you whatever you want, like a vending machine. But that's not what he's saying. Jesus has just been talking about confronting sin. So he's saying that if you prayerfully and lovingly confront somebody about their sin, and that's one of the most difficult things you can do, Jesus is with you. This should give us great confidence. And I hope that as a church, we can protect each other in this way. So just to finish, this has been a big passage for us today. We've talked about hell, angels, cutting off your hands and your feet, and confronting people about their sin. It's very serious language from Jesus because the stakes are huge. Stakes are so high. We need to protect our souls and our church family at all costs. But in the middle of this, we can be sure that God protects us at all costs, even in sending Jesus to pay for our sin.